Hi there, this is Mr. Hillaby, and I'm going to be covering 13.1 of my notes. Let's get going. So the outcomes we're going to cover is describe the general structure and function of a neuron in the myelin sheath. Identify the principal structures of the central and peripheral nervous systems and explain their functions in regulating the voluntary, somatic, or involuntary autonomic, kind of like automatic, systems of the human organism. And then we've got a bunch of terminology, okay? Some of which we're going to cover today, some of which is going to be covered as we move through the rest of this chapter. So this is your nervous system. This is Bob. So we can see it consists of the CNS, which is your brain and your spinal cord. And then all those nerves you see entering and exiting the CNS, so you can see them all here. That's part of your PNS, or peripheral nervous system. Okay, so focus on PNS versus CNS. So we're going to look at how the nervous system is organized. What happened to the boxers? All right, so nervous system contains 100 billion nerve cells just in the brain alone. Okay, and each neuron can connect to up to 10,000 other neurons. So quite a complex system that we are going to be looking at. So ultimately, nervous system helps to maintain homeostasis within the body. So homeostasis means a balance, even though you have fluctuating internal and external environments. So we're going to be using that term quite a bit in this unit. Okay, I'm going to get to endocrine system, same idea. Okay, nervous system can regulate tens of thousands of activities in a way that scientists do not fully understand. It intimately connected consciousness, intelligence, your creativity is all linked to, obviously, to your nervous system. Okay, nervous system controls most of your bodily functions like breathing, okay, to activities that involve fine motor control, learning, and thought. Okay, keep moving on here. So, again, today we're going to look at the overview organization of the nervous system and then get into the functional unit, that being the neuron. So you can take your nervous system and break it up into two major divisions, the CNS and the PNS. And if we look at this chart, okay, this flow chart, so nervous system, we got the CNS on the left, and that consists of your brain and spinal cord. So we'll spend a significant chunk of time looking at your brain, okay, in the third section. Peripheral nervous system, or PNS, is broken up into somatic nervous system. So that's under voluntary control. So if you think about moving muscles, okay, and telling your arm to move, that's your somatic nervous system, okay, involved. And there's two types of neurons that are involved with that somatic nervous system, that being motor and sensory neurons, okay, to make things move. Over here we have autonomic system, or ANS. It's involuntary or autonomic, so it's not under conscious control. And we can break that further up into sympathetic and parasympathetic, which we will look at in some more detail. Okay, the sympathetic nervous system, we often refer to it as your fight or flight response system. So when your brain detects danger, there's a series of physiological responses by the body, versus the parasympathetic nervous system, which is often called your rest and digest system. Okay, so it works to bring your body back to a resting state. This diagram here shows us we got the CNS on the left there with the spinal cord sending information to and from the brain, from the body. Everything you see here makes up the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. So that consists of sensory neurons carrying information from sensory receptors through sensory neurons towards the CNS. Okay, so for example, to the spinal cord here. And then you have what are called somatic motor neurons that are carrying information from the CNS through the peripheral nervous system to skeletal muscles to make the skeletal muscles contract. And then we have autonomic motor neurons here. Autonomic, again, is involuntary or automatic. So those signals are sent, through these motor neurons to things like smooth muscle. So things like to make your digestive tract push the food along, a process called peristalsis. Or cardiac muscle is heart muscle, to allow the heart to contract. Okay, so these slides are just defining each one of these categories. So CNS, again, brain and spinal cord, it integrates and processes all the incoming information. Peripheral nervous system, it includes nerves that carry signals to the CNS and nerves that carry information from the CNS out to muscles. Then we have our somatic nerves. Under voluntary control, so sensory receptors, nerves that carry sensory information to the CNS, and nerves that carry the signals from the CNS to what word is skeletal muscles, that are under voluntary control. Autonomic nerves, involuntary, controls things like glandular secretions. That's involuntary. And the functioning of smooth and cardiac muscles, that's also involuntary. And then again, sympathetic and parasympathetic are the divisions of the autonomic nervous system that work together in opposition to control some of these involuntary processes that regulate your fight or flight or rest and digest processes, which again, we'll be getting into the details of that a little bit later. So that's how your nervous system is organized. Moving into the functional and structural units of your nervous system, that being a neuron. So there's two basic cell types in the nervous system. There's neurons, functional structural unit, and then there's supporting cells referred to as glial cells. Neurons respond to physical chemical stimuli. They conduct electrochemical signals or nerve impulses. They release chemicals that regulate various body processes. That's just a neuron hanging out with a type of glial cell. The brain is a muscle. False. The brain is an organ primarily composed of neurons and glial cells. It's a bad joke. Same with this one right here. Bad jokes. So glial cells outnumber neurons 10 to 1. Collectively, glial cells are kind of like a big brother or sister. They sort of help out and protect the neurons. They remove waste for them. They defend them against infections. So they're supporting cells. They also provide a framework or a structural framework, for the nerves. Individual neurons are organized into tissue, right? These cells are organized into tissues called nerves. And if we take a look at this diagram, you can see a nerve, an image of a nerve, and then you can see bundles of nerve fibers, and then you can pull out one of those single nerve fibers out of the bundle, and we're getting down to this neuron level. That's what you're looking at in the picture there. Structure of a neuron. So different types of neurons, they have different shapes and sizes, but they have common features. So they have dendrites, a cell body, an axon, and branching ends or terminal ends, end branch terminals, different names there. But what you need to be able to do is recognize these various parts of a neuron and have a rough idea of what their function is. So that's what we're going to do next. So nerve impulses always flow in one direction through a neuron. So we say unidirectional, it's like a unicycle, one wheel. And that is from the dendrites. So you can see the red arrows there showing you the direction of the nerve impulse. From the dendrites, through the cell body, through an axon, which is the blue part underneath those little green sausage-looking Schwann cells. Okay, so axon is sort of that long part there, and then out through the end branch terminals here, or the terminal ends, and then synapsing, or the next in the circuit could be another neuron, or it could be an effector like a muscle, something like that. So function of dendrites, you can see those branches there. They are receiving nerve impulses from adjacent neurons in the neural pathway, or they could be synapsing with a sensory receptor cell, which is detecting a stimulus. So, for example, in your eye, there are photoreceptor cells that detect light stimulus, and then that would generate a nerve impulse that would travel through a sensory neuron. Okay, so the dendrites would synapse or sort of connect. And when I say synapse, neurons don't actually physically touch each other. There's a gap or a space there called the synapse. Okay, and then they're going to relay and carry that signal to the cell body. So that's dendrites. So, for example, when you're learning something new, your neurons are actually establishing more dendrites. So actually grow more dendrites and make more connections. And interestingly enough, okay, as a teenager, for example, as your brain is continuing to mature and develop, those neural pathways in your brain that are being utilized more frequently, you're growing more dendrites. Those neural pathways which you use less often, your brain actually prunes off some of those dendrites, okay, and removes some of those connections. Okay, so your brain is quite pliable in that. It's adaptable, right? So if you're spending a lot of your time learning to play an instrument, well, you're growing a lot of dendrites that allow you to be able to do that. If you're playing a lot of, gaming or playing apps on your phone, well, you're growing dendrites that are going to help you perform playing apps on your cell phone. So, your brain is quite pliable now. So depending on, what you're focusing on, your brain is adapting, growing or pruning those dendrites. Cell body, okay, contains the nucleus, as you can see. It's a site of metabolic reactions. Okay, it's processing information coming in from the dendrites. Next piece is the axon. So the axon is it's on the bottom here. The axon is the blue part of it, like the neuron itself here is in blue. Okay, and so you can kind of see it underneath the axon, underneath these Schwann cells. So these Schwann cells are a special type of glial cell that wraps itself around the axon. Okay, and you can see, there's gaps in between these Schwann cells. And neurons can either be myelinated or neurons can be unmyelinated, which means they can either have these Schwann cells wrapping around their axon, or they don't have any Schwann cells, okay, where you just have a bare axon there. Okay, and you can actually see tissue, nervous tissue that contains myelinated neurons, because these Schwann cells right here produce a fatty substance that gives it like a white glistening color. And so we call it white matter. Tissue that has myelinated neurons is referred to as white matter. Okay, appears white to the naked eye. Conversely, nervous tissue that has neurons that are unmyelinated, all right, will not have these Schwann cells, and that nervous tissue looks gray, so we call it gray matter. So your central nervous system, your spinal cord and brain, has both myelinated and unmyelinated neurons within it. So it's got both white and gray matter. Your peripheral nerves, okay, contain myelinated neurons. And you'll see what the significance of that is in terms of nerve transmission in detail a little bit later. So just a little more detail on these Schwann cells. So there are two parts to a Schwann cell, okay, we should recognize. So one is the myelin itself. So I'm just going to let all this text come out. The myelin is all these inner wrappings. So when you look at this diagram on the left, okay, the Schwann cell itself is this whole cell here. You can see the yellowish axon, okay, that's running underneath it. But these inner linings or wrappings is the myelin sheath, and that is responsible for speeding up nerve transmission. So the myelin speeds up nerve transmission. And we'll talk about the details of that a little bit later. Okay, so if you look down here, this is a good diagram. So you can see the myelin sheath, inner wrappings around the axon. The outermost lining or membrane of a Schwann cell is referred to as the neurolemma. Okay, and the neurolemma is important. It can promote the regrowth of a damaged axon. So, for example, if you cut your finger and you sever, say, some nerves, those peripheral nerves will be myelinated or have Schwann cells there. But the outer lining of the Schwann cells, the neurolemma, can repair those damaged axons. Okay, unmyelinated neurons, on the other hand, don't have Schwann cells, so no neurolemma. So thus, if there's damage to the axon, it can't be repaired. Okay, so somebody that for example, gets bucked off their horse and breaks their back or neck or whatever, and they're paralyzed from the neck down. This is because they have damaged the gray tissue of their spinal cord, right? The unmyelinated axons have been damaged and they can't be repaired. Just like Christopher Reeves. Christopher Reeves was the guy that played Superman. In the original Superman, got bucked off his horse and broke his neck. All right, so this is just an opportunity for you to go ahead and see if you can label all these structures of a neuron. And by the way, this is a motor neuron. There's 3 different types of neurons we're going to look at. This one in particular is a motor neuron. So pause the screencast and see if you can identify these structures. Whoops. Okay, well, maybe I can just write on my screen here. We have dendrites. We have nucleus. We have cell body. We have terminal ends, end branch terminals. Okay, one I skipped over was, notice how there's gaps in between the Schwann cells, which you see in yellow there, where you can see the exposed axon in blue under here and here, okay, and then all the way along the axon. Those are called the nodes of Ranvier. And you don't have to say it like that. I just like saying it like that. Nodes of Ranvier. And these are the Schwann cells. Oh, and don't forget axon. All right. So how did you do? So this image of a neuron looks a little different than the last one. This is a motor neuron. So notice we have dendrites connected to the cell body. We have the long axon, and then we have our end branch terminals. Whoops. Here we have a sensory neuron. So notice we have our dendrites. Then we have like an axon here, but the cell body with the nucleus is in the middle. Okay, and then we get the axon here leading to the end branch terminals. So a lot of the similar terminology, but just notice that the position of the cell body is in a slightly different place, okay, between sensory and motor neurons. Okay, so what kind of neuron is this? Is it a sensory neuron or a motor neuron? If you guess motor neuron, then you are correct. And some of these, this one has more detail than what's required, right? Like neurofibrils, axon, hillock, these aren't curricular. Okay, so what is curricular? Dendrites, cell body, axon, end branch terminals. Okay, or end terminals is fine. It's recognizing that. Nodes of Ranvier, recognize Schwann cell, myelin, and neurolimma, right? Making up a Schwann cell. There's a nice neuron. These are different kinds of neurons. So this is a generalized neuron that we typically draw a motor neuron there. But look at, if you look at the cerebellum, which is at the base of your brain, you can see how elaborate the dendrites are here versus the retina, which is at the back of your eye, right? Or cerebral cortex, okay, the surface of your cerebrum of your brain. Over here versus over here. You've got, look at how long this axon is, okay, in your spinal cord. So you have some neurons that can go from your hip down to your toe, like an axon, one neuron that long. So they do come in different shapes and sizes. Okay, we're going to skip that. Answers are there. Check your understanding. Okay, so moving on to types of neurons, and then a neural pathway, and then the last piece we'll be looking at special neural pathways called the reflex arc. So there are three main types of neurons. Sensory neurons, okay, they take information from sensory receptor cells and transmit them towards the CNS. Okay, interneurons are found entirely within the CNS. So they are, inter is in the middle, right, in between sensory neurons and motor neurons. And then motor neurons carry information away from the CNS to what are called effectors, which are things like muscles and glands and other organs. So these are the terms you need to remember when looking at neural pathways. So sensory receptors are specialized kind of neurons that detect a stimulus or a type of energy and then generate an action potential or generate a nerve impulse. And then that nerve impulse is conducted through sensory neurons. So that's the next in the sequence. And those sensory neurons carry the nerve impulse to the interneurons. Interneurons are made entirely in the CNS. That's where you find them. They are an integration center processing all that information, right, that's coming in. And then signals are sent from interneurons within the CNS out through motor neurons, which are part of the peripheral nervous system, right, and carries those nerve impulses, okay, to effectors. And then effectors would include things like our muscles and glands, other glands that respond to impulses. So those are the general terms, okay, we need to recognize when we're looking at neural pathways. So, for example, in this diagram here, you have our two main branches of the nervous system. You have the CNS, right, which is your brain and spinal cord. You have your integration center here. So this is where you're getting integration and processing. Here you would have receptors. Okay, and then sensory input would be through sensory neurons. This is, like I said, processing and integration. Hard to write on this screen. Okay, down here we have motor output, so that would be through motor neurons. Okay, and then those motor neurons will carry signal to the effector, which is your muscle. Okay, I guess that's just the idea here. And we got PNS is here, so peripheral nervous system would be sensory neurons and motor neurons. And this is the response. Okay, maybe I'm wrong on that. But as long as you get the general idea, okay, of a general neural pathway. Whoops. So this would be more looking at it from the sense of the actual neurons. Okay, so we got a sensory receptor cell in a skin. It detects a pressure if you're pushing on the skin there. Underneath the skin or epidermis would be these receptor cells. They would detect that pressure stimulus, or it could be heat or pain or whatever the stimulus is. And then it'll send a nerve impulse through sensory neuron. Notice the cell body's in the middle there. Okay, through the axon, out through the end branch terminals. Those synapses or get really close, okay, to the next neuron in the neural pathway, that being an interneuron. You can see an interneuron a little bit different in shape, right? So this one's unmyelinated, not much of an axon here, and it's unmyelinated, so no Schwann cells there. And then that interneuron is synapsing with a motor neuron here. Okay, and then the signal nerve impulse continues through a motor neuron to the effector. Okay, in this case, a muscle, making the muscle contract. What's going on there? Okay, next. Okay, same as before. So this looks a lot like that other diagram I was just labeling there. Question time. So maybe pause the screencast and try these questions. Neurofibromatosis is a genetic disorder characterized by the growth of tumors called neurofibromas around some neurons. Neurofibromas result from the uncontrolled growth of cells that produce the myelin sheath. The structures that are affected by neurofibromas are so where do we find myelin sheath? Well, myelin sheath is part of a Schwann cell, and Schwann cells are found on the surrounding the axon. So not dendrites. So you got axons. And are they of neurons in gray matter or neurons of white matter? So again, knowing the difference between gray and white matter here. Myelinated neurons appear white. Unmyelinated neurons are gray. So this must be white matter. So the answer is B. Two types of neurofibromatosis have been identified. In type 1, tumors form around the nerves in the peripheral nervous system. So the neurons that are affected in type 1 are... So we're looking for P and S. So the brain, for example, that's part of the CNS, right? So I can get rid of B and D. And then interneurons are found only in the CNS, so I can get rid of A and B. So just through the process of elimination, I'm down to C. So PNS is made up of autonomic neurons and somatic. That's correct, right? Those are the two branches of the PNS. So the answer is C. So again, if you know all the organization of the nervous system, then you would be able to answer number 4. Again, understanding the structure and function of neurons and Schwann cells and the myelin sheath would help you answer number 3. Okay, the reflex arc. So some neurons are organized to enable your body to react rapidly in times of fast and danger. That's a quote from a song. Song by Mitch. If you have Spotify, M-I-T-C-H. If you have Spotify, I'm sure you'd find Mitch. Look up Fast and Danger. You won't be disappointed. These sudden unlearned involuntary responses to certain stimuli are called reflex arcs. So the key to underline here is involuntary responses. Sudden, unlearned. So we've all heard of reflexes. So if someone throws a ball at your face, okay, you see the ball's coming, and then you have to consciously realize that ball's coming there, and then decide how you're going to respond, right? Whether you're going to duck or you're going to get your hand out there and try to catch it. Okay, those aren't the reflexes I'm talking about. Okay, so these are involuntary responses. Okay, and typically these reflex arcs are there to prevent damage. It allows for rapid responses, okay, to prevent damage. And reflex arcs are quite simple. They involve the same 5 elements I've been going through. Okay, but the key here is that a reflex arc can bypass the brain. Okay, so if we take a look at the diagram in the bottom right-hand corner, so it starts with a stimulus. So you can see, you get a cactus there, and you touch it, and you touch one of the needles or spines, and obviously that's going to initiate a pain signal through a pain receptor. That signal then is going to travel through a sensory neuron. There's the cell body right in the middle. And then it's going to synapse with a very small interneuron in the spinal cord. Okay, so a little small interneuron there. And then the signal will continue on through a motor neuron out through the peripheral nervous system here to an effector, which would be skeletal muscle. The skeletal muscle will then contract, and a person will pull their finger away. Okay, and this all happens, okay, before the person has realized that they poked something sharp. Their hand is already pulled away. Okay, a similar response would happen if, say, you touched something really hot, like you had your stove on and didn't realize you touched something really hot. Same idea, your hand pulls away. Of course, you're going to feel that later because also synapsing in your interneuron here, so if we go back over here, is an interneuron here, and it's synapsing, and it's going to carry that signal up to the brain for processing, and then your brain will say, you idiot, you just touched something sharp. Ow, that hurts, right? And then you start feeling all the pain and all that is associated with what just happened. Okay, but with a reflex arc, okay, this is not involved in the actual reflex or the withdrawal reflex, as we call it. The brain is not involved directly. Okay, the brain processes that after the fact. Okay, that's just a very similar diagram showing the same thing. Okay, very similarly, same idea. You can see here's a reflex hammer here. Okay, and this is called the knee jerk reflex. So you just hit this patellar tendon right underneath the kneecap that you see above there, kneecap right there. You hit right underneath there, and then that's going to cause the leg to swing up. Okay, that's, again, a reflex arc. It's supposed to help you something with walking or whatever, but you have several reflex arcs within the body. Okay, maybe some people, you think of some examples. There's something called a gag reflex. Your pupils. So if you shine light on the pupils, what happens to you, the black part of your eye, the pupils? Well, when you shine a light in it, the pupils will constrict to protect your eyes with excess light from entering your eye, right? And then conversely, when you're in a dark room, the pupils will dilate. All right, let's just skip over that. Your reflexes are still good. Jokes. All right, and then there's a bunch of practice. All right, so that is it for 13.1. Love this bio.